The holes went in along the crown of the hill, up where only cedars and loose rock had ever held. Nell Boyd was 13 that spring, working the slope in a man's canvas coat with the cuffs turned back twice. She dug 40 holes in ground that fought her, one apple whip laid beside each. Down in the good bottomland, where the soil ran black and deep, she planted nothing at all. That was the part folks could not get past. Her father watched from the barn door and did not call her down. When Alton Kerr rode by and asked what in the world she was doing up on bare rock, she only said the trees would do better there. She did not explain what she meant. She did not explain it to anyone, not that spring, nor the 4 that followed. Nobody on Turkey Creek knew what the girl was after. Before long, they would. If quiet stories like this one, about patience and paying attention, and the old knowledge that still holds, mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment telling us what part of the country you're watching from. It helps more folks find these stories. Searcy County sits deep in the Ozark Hills, where the ridges run in long green waves and the hollows fill with mist on cool mornings. The Boyd place had stood there since 1911, 40 acres of bottom along the creek and a steep shoulder of hill nobody counted worth much. In April, the air smelled of turned earth and cut cedar and the sweet rot of last year's leaves. Etta Boyd kept a garden on ground so full of chert you could hear the hoe ring, and still she brought beans and greens out of it like magic. Silas Boyd worked slow and said little. He was a man who watched a thing 3 seasons before he trusted it. Nell was the quiet one. Not a clever child who had to be first at everything, just a girl who noticed. She knew which hens hid their eggs before her mother did. She knew the creek would rise a day before it showed, and she had marked, without saying so, exactly where the frost lay white in the low grass each fall, and where it never reached at all. Word of the hilltop orchard got around the way such things do. At the feed store, men allowed the Boyd girl had planted her trees standing on her head. Alton Kerr told it at church, grinning, that she'd left the best bottom in the county empty and gone to farming the rocks. The laughter that followed was never mean. It was the puzzled kind, the way people laugh at a thing they cannot make sense of. "She'll get a peck of apples off that ledge if she's lucky," said her Uncle Roy at Sunday dinner. "Trees want deep dirt. Everybody knows it." He wasn't being hard. He truly believed she'd thrown a year's work away. Grady Muir, whose own orchard ran fat and green along the creek 2 miles down, was gentler about it. He only said the girl was young, and young folks had to learn the ground the slow way. Through all of it, Silas said nothing at the table, and Nell, asked again and again why, only shrugged and kept her own counsel. The truth was, Nell had not read it in any book, and no old-timer had pulled her aside to tell it. She had simply watched. For as long as she could remember, the fog came up off Turkey Creek on still mornings and lay in the bottoms like a lake, filling the low ground to a line partway up the hill and going no higher. The first frosts of fall did the very same. She would walk out and find the bottom grass stiff and white, while the slope above it stayed soft and green, as though someone had poured the cold in and let it settle. Some springs, the wild plums down in the hollow got their blossoms burned brown, while the same plums up on the chalk knob came through untouched and heavy with fruit. She thought about it a long while. Water ran downhill and pooled in the low places. She had seen that all her life, and the cold behaved just the same, sliding off the ridges at night, gathering in the bottoms, rising only so far. If cold sank like water, she reasoned, then the safe place for blossoms was up out of its reach. So that was where she put her trees. The reason is plain once you see it, and orchardmen have known it for generations. Cold air is heavier than warm air. On a clear, still night, with no wind to stir things, that heavy, cold air slides downhill like water spilling off a table and collects in the lowest ground it can find. The bottoms and the hollows turn into what old farmers called frost pockets. A slope lets the cold keep sliding on past, so the trees on the shoulder of a hill sit a few degrees warmer than the ones below, sometimes 5 or 6 degrees. And on the wrong night, those few degrees are the whole difference between a live blossom and a dead one. Nell had no word for any of it. She only knew the cold went where the fog went. Knowing a thing and growing it are two different labors, and the hill made her earn every tree. The first summer came dry. The soil on the crown was thin, only a few inches deep over solid rock, and it baked hard by July. Her whips wilted, leaves curling like scorched paper. Nell carried water up the slope by hand, 2 buckets at a time, morning and evening, till her shoulders ached. Even so, 9 of the 40 died back that first year. She grubbed out the dead ones, set new whips in their place, and packed flat stones around each trunk to hold the damp in the ground. The second winter, the rabbits and deer found the tender bark and gnawed a ring around a dozen young trees. A girdled tree dies, so she wrapped each trunk in split cedar and old wire and built a fence of thorny locust along the downhill edge. The third fall, voles working under the tall grass girdled 2 more at the root. After that, she kept the ground bare and clean around every trunk and painted them white against the winter sun. It was that third autumn, watching from the fence, that Silas set down his coffee, took up a mattock without a word, and climbed the hill to dig beside her. By the 4th spring, the trees had taken hold. Their roots had found the seams in the rock and gone down after water the way hill trees learn to. The trunks thickened, the tops filled out, and threw a little shade at last. In the 5th spring, for the first time, every tree on the crown came into full bloom together. 4 straight rows of white running along the top of the hill, pretty as anything, though most who saw it still counted it a foolish place to grow an apple. Nell said nothing to change their minds. She only walked the rows at dusk and watched the bottoms fill with evening mist, the way they always had. That 5th April ran warm too early. A soft, muggy week pulled every orchard in the valley into bloom at once, the Boyd Hill and the deep bottoms alike, all of it white together. The old people did not like it. Roy stood on the porch and remembered the killing freeze of 1955, the year the whole county lost its fruit and half its gardens besides. "Come too early," he said. "It always pays for it." 3 days on, the wind died to nothing. The sky went the color of old brass at sundown, and the air turned still and dry. The county agent's warning came over the radio that evening. A hard freeze by morning, clear and windless, the worst kind. Down in the barns, the cattle bunched against the fence. Nell walked her rows one last time in the dark, touching the cold blossoms, and looked down at the bottoms, where the mist was already gathering thick. The cold came down in the night without a sound. By first light, the thermometer on the barn read 26 degrees, and the whole valley lay silver and still. Grady Muir walked out into his fine bottom orchard along the creek and knew before he reached the first tree the blossoms hung brown and limp, cooked soft by the freeze, every last one. 2 miles of the best fruit ground in the county, and by that morning, near 9 of every 10 blooms were dead. He was not a man who wept easy, but he stood in that ruined row a long while, with his hat in his hands. Up and down Turkey Creek it was the same. The bottoms burned, a whole year's fruit gone in a single, quiet night. Then folks looked up at the hill. The frost lay exactly where the fog had always lain, filling the bottoms to a line part way up the slope and climbing no higher. Above that line, the Boyd trees stood untouched, 4 rows of them still white and whole in the morning sun. Only the lowest row, dipping into the cold, had lost a little bloom. The cold had pooled in the low ground, just as she'd always seen it do, and her orchard had stood above the tide. Grady Muir came up the Chalk Knob Road 3 days later, his boots still stained dark from walking his own dead orchard. He climbed to the top and stood among the blooming trees without saying much at all. After a time, he asked the only thing that mattered to him now: how high up the hill the cold had reached, and where exactly the safe line ran. Nell walked him to the lowest row, the one that had taken the nip, and showed him. He looked from there down to the misted bottom a long moment, fixing the height of it in his mind. He didn't say she'd been right. He didn't have to. The next winter, Grady set his new trees higher. So did the Hollis place, and 2 others after. No one made a fuss over it. The hill just slowly filled with orchards, and no one laughed anymore. There is a kind of knowing that never gets written down, that comes only from watching the same ground through enough gray mornings. Cold runs downhill like water, and so does doubt. The wise ones learn to build a little higher than both. Nell Boyd had spent 5 years being wrong in everybody's eyes, carrying buckets up a rock, burying dead whips, saying nothing while they laughed. And she had been right the whole time. Not because she was clever, but because she had paid attention when there was nothing yet to see. The apples came in heavy that fall, the first real crop off the hill. But the fruit was never truly the harvest. The harvest was the seeing, the long, patient looking that let a quiet girl read the cold before it came, and set her trees where the frost could never follow. Nell Boyd is past 30 now, and the orchard on the Chalk Knob has grown to more than 200 trees. On cool mornings, she still walks the top row at dawn, watching the mist fill the bottoms below her to that same old line. Come spring, she grafts science for any neighbor who asks, and she tells them all the same thing: plant high. Thank you for spending this time on the hill with us. If Nell's story stayed with you, tell us in the comments about someone you knew who saw a thing early, before the rest of the world caught up. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, and we'll meet again by another old fence line.